The phone that rang that night was never supposed to ring. Not unless the world was about to end. In a hardened command center buried inside Cheyenne Mountain, a red phone sat waiting for only one purpose. The warning that Soviet bombers were crossing the Arctic and nuclear fallout was minutes away. This was the nerve center of American panic, the last line of defense before annihilation, the place where men waited to decide if millions would live or die. And then, on a cold winter night in 1955, it rang. A colonel lifted the receiver, bracing for catastrophe. Instead, he heard a small voice ask, "Is this Santa?" And in that instant, the most fear-built surveillance system in human history pivoted from tracking nuclear death to tracking magic. From radar designed to detect annihilation, to monitoring reindeer, from predicting mushroom clouds, to predicting chimney arrival times. And in a moment that would echo for generations, the United States military did something no other superpower had ever attempted. It turned its Cold War machinery into a bedtime story. What began as a misdialed phone call would evolve into a global ritual watched by millions. A tradition so normalized that few people ever questioned the deeper implication. Why is the same government that watches for war the same one confirming Santa Claus is real? Was this just holiday cheer? Or did America accidentally create the most effective psychological operation in its history? One where surveillance feels comforting, authority feels gentle, and the state becomes the guardian of childhood belief. Because from that night forward, every Christmas Eve, the most advanced defense network on Earth would make one promise to the entire world. Relax, we're watching Santa. And if they can make you trust them with the arrival of magic, what else do you trust them with? Before we talk about Santa, we have to talk about psychology. Not the cozy therapy on a couch kind, but the calculated, government-issued version. The kind designed not to comfort, but to steer. A psychological operation, or PsyOp, is a strategic communication campaign intended to influence how people think, feel, and behave. It does not rely on bullets. It relies on belief. It doesn't conquer through force, it conquers through perception. And the most effective PsyOps don't feel like manipulation. They feel normal, reassuring, familiar. PsyOps are used to shape narrative, soften resistance, build compliance, destabilize enemies, and manufacture emotional responses that align with strategic objectives. They are rarely announced as such. In fact, their power lies in subtlety, and the way a voice sounds calm, and the authority behind uniform, and the friendliness of a message that arrives when fear is peaking. Governments have used PsyOps to convince enemy soldiers they were surrounded, to make populations believe in the inevitability of surrender, to sway public opinion at times of war, and to rewrite emotional memory after national trauma. But traditional PsyOps aren't gentle. They aren't festive. They aren't filled with cookies and reindeer. They look like leaflets scattered over battlefields, radio broadcasts whispering inevitability, false messages designed to break morale, information tailored not to inform, but to control. One of the most famous examples? A fully declassified U.S. psychological operation from the Gulf War, when American forces used high-frequency audio broadcasts to break down entire Iraqi units long before a single shot was fired. This wasn't Hollywood mind control. It wasn't propaganda posters. It wasn't hearts and minds cartoons. It was calculated psychological pressure. Aircraft and mobile loudspeakers blasted targeted audio, a mix of relentless high-frequency tones, fabricated battlefield updates, messages claiming Iraqi commanders had already surrendered. warnings that resistance was pointless, and scripted assurances that surrender was safe and honorable. The goal wasn't to kill, it was to erode the mind. And it worked. Entire battalions abandoned their positions, walked toward American lines with their hands up, and repeated phrases pulled straight from that broadcast. Proof that the operation didn't just reach them physically, it captured them psychologically. That is a PsyOp. Not cute, not cozy, not whimsical. A PsyOp is pressure applied to the human mind until belief and behavior shift, sometimes without the target ever realizing why. And yet, here we find Santa. In the middle of the most heavily fortified surveillance network on Earth, at the intersection of radar, missile defense, and childhood belief, spoken of with the same authority used to identify incoming threats. This is where the story becomes strange. Because NORAD never announces Santa as a myth. It announces him as trackable, observable, verifiable, coordinates provided, speed calculated, position confirmed, which raises an uncomfortable but fascinating question. When a military institution that specializes in threat perception willingly participates in a global belief ritual, is that not psychology in its purest operational form? This isn't the chaos of folklore. This is structured reassurance. Uniformed voices calmly telling children, yes, he's real. Yes, he's monitored. Yes, we have eyes on him. It is risk elimination by narrative comfort. Fear reduction through authority alignment. A mass emotional ritual broadcast from the same machines that once prepared for nuclear war. And whether NORAD ever labeled it a PsyOp is irrelevant, because the effect is undeniable. For one night a year, surveillance becomes safety, military power becomes magic, and government authority becomes the voice that tells your child it's okay to sleep. That's not just holiday cheer. That is narrative engineering. Because if you can get millions of people to willingly participate in a story reinforced by state authority, a story tied to monitoring, tracking, positioning, and oversight, then you haven't just entertained them. You've conditioned them, not to fear the watchful eye, but to find comfort in it. And somewhere between fear of the bomb and faith in the sleigh, America didn't just invent a Santa Tracker. It invented a new relationship with power. One where the overseer smiles and the system feels warm. Long before a child misdialed a top-secret phone in Colorado Springs, long before NORAD screens lit up with a mythical blip shaped suspiciously like a sleigh, the US government had already been shaping Santa into something more than a holiday figure, something useful, something symbolic, something operational. Because the truth is this, Operation Santa Tracker didn't begin in 1955. It began decades earlier, when America first realized that Santa could do something no politician, general, or newspaper could. He could make fear feel safe. During the Civil War, political cartoonist Thomas Nast drew Santa in Union blues, handing gifts to Union soldiers while mocking the Confederacy. It wasn't an accident. It was emotional targeting, a way to reassure troops who were cold, hungry, and uncertain whether they'd live long enough to see another December. By World War I, Santa was everywhere in official posters, urging citizens to buy war bonds, encouraging workers to produce more ammunition, cheering on the Allied cause, symbolizing the good in the good versus evil framing of the war. By World War II, the transformation was complete. The government knew exactly what it had. A universally trusted, apolitical, emotional, potent figure who could bypass cynicism and speak directly to morale. Santa appeared in wartime leaflets, factory posters, treasury messaging, and overseas propaganda. He wasn't just delivering gifts anymore. He was delivering compliance. And according to decades of scattered references across nostalgia blogs, history notes, and repeated quotes, there were even claims, though not supported by a surviving primary document, that Eisenhower's staff once issued a press release announcing a North Pole Command, with Santa overseeing operations and commanding an army of gnomes converting old material into Christmas gifts. The original document may be elusive, but the pattern is unmistakable. The US military repeatedly conscripted Santa into official messaging during times of fear. Santa was becoming a government asset long before he appeared on radar. But the clearest proto-Santa PsyOp didn't come from soft propaganda. It came from radar. December 24th, 1948, 7 years before the Sears Misdial, 10 years before NORAD even existed. The US Air Force issued a straight-faced communication stating that the early warning radar net to the north had detected one unidentified sleigh powered by 8 reindeer at 14,000 feet heading 180 degrees. No jingle bells, no ho ho ho, just dry operational language. The same tone that could one day announce incoming Soviet bombers, applied to Santa Claus, and the Associated Press carried it nationwide. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a toy ad. This was a military message delivered with the seriousness of a classified briefing. It was the first public moment where America got a glimpse of something very strange. The same machinery built to detect annihilation could also be used to invoke wonder. And the public loved it. No panic, no anger, just delight. A welcome reprieve from a world inching towards Cold War dread. The government took note, because if you can reframe fear-based technology with the innocence of Santa Claus, you've just discovered a powerful psychological lever. You can shift what people feel about surveillance. Throughout the early 1950s, the United States and Canada built the largest surveillance architecture the world had ever seen. The Pine Tree Line across southern Canada, the Mid-Canada Tripwire Line, the Dew Line, or the Distant Early Warning Network, stretching across the Arctic like a frozen crown of radar domes. These were not gentle projects. They were born from fear. The belief that Soviet bombers would come over the top and give America only minutes to respond. Billions of dollars, thousands of operators, remote Arctic outposts, constant readiness. This was the system that would define the psychology of the Cold War. The idea that danger was always coming from the north. And that is the same direction, historically, where America said Santa comes from. It was a coincidence too perfect to ignore. Because by the mid-1950s, the narrative was ready. The infrastructure was built. The psychology was primed. All it needed was a spark, a moment, a misdialed phone call. The one that would turn a nuclear alert system into the most wholesome surveillance ritual on the planet. By the time the phone rang in 1955, the stage had already been built. Concrete poured deep into the mountains, wires threaded across the frozen tundra, radar domes staring endlessly into black northern skies. America was no longer just a nation. It was a nation on edge. The Cold War did not live only in the headlines. It lived in the classrooms, where children practiced duck and cover drills. It lived in living rooms, where families wondered if they would ever hear a siren for real. It lived inside command centers that watched the polar horizon for shapes that should never appear. The fear was simple, and it was paralyzing. If the Soviets attacked, they would come over the pole, fast, high, and unstoppable. So the United States built eyes. Not metaphorical ones, technological ones. A wall of radar stretching across Canada and the Arctic, a frozen perimeter designed to detect the first whisper of incoming bombers before their shadows reached American cities. That was not symbolic structure. This was the front line of apocalypse prevention. Operators sat in dim rooms watching slow-moving green blips crawl across screens. Every mark represented a potential extinction event. Every unknown track carried the weight of 1,000,000 lives. And at the center of that system sat one critical nerve point: Colorado Springs, a hardened command center where the red phone meant only one thing. The world was about to change forever, until it didn't. Instead of announcing death from the Arctic, the system announced a sleigh. And in perhaps the most accidental act of psychological engineering in modern history, the same network that was built to identify annihilation was suddenly placed in the service of childhood imagination. The surreal nature of it is hard to exaggerate. Imagine it. Men trained for nuclear scenarios, calmly shifting to track a mythical figure with reindeer? Operators who once watched for bomber squadrons now calculating Santa's speed, altitude, and trajectory? A command center designed for war, issuing updates about toy distribution. But here's the part that matters most: the quiet psychological transformation that followed. For decades, the American public had been taught to associate this technology with fear. Radar meant danger, blips meant threat, interceptors meant last resort. And now, suddenly, radar meant Santa. The narrative flipped. Surveillance no longer felt ominous, it felt festive. Monitoring no longer felt cold, it felt protective. The same system that once prepared for emergency retaliation was now framed as a guardian of Christmas joy. This is how a PsyOp earns its stripes without ever being called one. Not through force, through familiarity. Because when the system that watches the sky promises you that Santa is safe, protected, and on schedule, it does something extraordinary. It teaches you that the watcher is not your enemy. It teaches you that the eyes above you are not there to judge, but to comfort. And generations of children grew up hearing that the people with the most powerful surveillance systems on Earth were using those systems to make sure magic made it home safely. That's not coincidence. That's emotional conditioning dressed like holiday tradition. And the most brilliant part? It didn't feel like manipulation. It felt like love. Every PsyOp needs a catalyst. Every myth needs a moment. And this one arrived not through strategy, but through a child's trembling finger and a misprinted phone number. Colorado Springs, 1955. A Sears department store advertisement invited children to call Santa directly with their Christmas wishes. A phone number was printed beneath the jolly promise. Depending on which version of the story you hear, that number was either misprinted or one hopeful child simply dialed the wrong digit. But what matters is where the call landed, not the North Pole, not a mall Santa, not a toy workshop. It rang inside the Continental Air Defense Command, or CONAD, a line reserved for the worst imaginable. Confirmation that nuclear bombers were approaching and America had minutes to decide its fate. The phone rang, and Colonel Harry Shope answered. What happened next has become a part of American folklore, softened and polished by time. Some accounts say Shope initially responded with visible irritation, telling the child that there might be a Santa at the North Pole, but he wasn't the one he worried about coming from that direction. Other stories tell a sweeter version, that Shope immediately slipped into a cheerful tone, responding, "Ho, ho, ho, yes, I am Santa Claus. What can I do for you?" The facts blur here, and that blur is revealing. Because the more the story is told, the more the edges are sanded down. The initial awkwardness fades, the frustration disappears, and in its place forms a perfectly shaped legend, a colonel choosing kindness over protocol. What does not blur is this. Once the first call ended, more children began dialing, and instead of shutting down the line, Shope made a decision. He assigned operators to answer as Santa. They consulted radar scopes. They improvised Santa's location. They turned classified monitoring boards into Christmas maps. And somewhere along the way, Shope realized something powerful was happening. Not just cheer, but optics. So he called in his public affairs officer, Colonel Barney Oldfield. And Oldfield issued a press release that would quietly invent a national ritual. It announced that CONAD was officially tracking Santa Claus, guarding his sleigh and ensuring his safe passage from those who do not believe in Christmas. This is the moment the accident became doctrine. The moment whimsy fused with military authority. The moment the U.S. defense system didn't just monitor the skies. It claimed ownership over a myth. Yet, what makes this event especially fascinating is not that it happened. It's how quickly it became tradition. The following year, they did it again and again, until the story was no longer a child called the wrong number, but this is what we've always done. A PR fluke became a legacy protocol. A system of improvisation became institutionalized nostalgia. The system learned something crucial that night. People don't fear the watcher when the watcher smiles. In fact, they welcome it. They invite it into their living rooms, put it on television, tell their children to trust its voice. And slowly, subtly, imperceptibly, a military command center took its place in the mythology of Christmas. Not as a guard, not as an enforcer, but as a storyteller. The myth grew. The imagery softened. The darker Cold War context fell away. All that remained was the fantasy. NORAD is watching Santa, as if the watcher was never built for war, as if the phone never meant annihilation, as if the red glare of radar screens had always been festive. And here's the unsettling beauty of it all. The transformation worked. The machine that once symbolized fear was reborn as comfort. The architecture of surveillance became the architecture of belief. And once a belief takes root in a child's memory, it stops feeling like propaganda, and it starts feeling like tradition. By the time NORAD officially replaced CONAD, the change was barely noticed by the public. Because the mission hadn't changed. Every Christmas Eve, the same announcement echoed out into the world. Santa is on the move. And we're watching him. Phones lit up with calls from living rooms in Texas, kitchens in Toronto, bedrooms in Berlin, and couches in Tokyo. Volunteers sat in headsets where war alerts once echoed, answering questions not about national security, but about snow conditions over Greenland and whether Rudolph has had his break. Children didn't hear Air Defense Command. They heard certainty. Parents didn't hear military operation. They heard reassurance. And NORAD didn't just track Santa. It began to narrate him. Coordinates, airspace clearance, velocity updates, live Santa cam imagery piped through the same systems developed to spot spy balloons in aircraft incursions. A global audience tuned in to watch movement across continents in real time, trusting without hesitation that the calm voice on the other end knew exactly what was happening above their roofs. And that's the quiet genius of this tradition. Because Santa Tracker didn't just create wonder, it trained reflex. It taught generations that oversight could feel like safety, that observation could feel like guardianship, that when the most powerful surveillance network on Earth assures you everything is fine, you don't argue. You exhale. Children fall asleep easier knowing someone important is watching the skies. Parents smile, grateful for a moment of innocence in a complicated world. A military command center becomes a living room companion. A nuclear-era bunker becomes a storytelling booth. A system born from dread becomes a warm, seasoned constant. The question isn't whether this is wholesome. It undeniably is. The question is why it works so perfectly. Why humans instinctively trust the voice of authority when it carries kindness. Why surveillance feels less threatening when it's dressed in bells and velvet. Why the scariest machines in human history can be made to feel safe when paired with narrative of protection. This is the strange duality of Operation Santa Tracker. It is both comfort and conditioning, both tradition and transformation, both delight and design, and yet there's no malice in it, no agenda to control, no memo outlining psychological dominance, only a pattern of fear softened by wonder, a pattern of authority humanized by ritual, a pattern of government learning that the most powerful way to earn the trust is not through commands, but through care. If America did create the most successful and wholesome PsyOp of all time, it didn't do it with coercion. It did it with cookies. It didn't do it with a threat. It did it with twinkling lights and a reassuring voice saying, "He's just crossed the Atlantic." And perhaps that's the most settling and beautiful part of it all. That in a world built on vigilance and power, the greatest symbol of safety for millions of people each December is a calm official voice reminding them that magic is still moving through the sky and that someone is watching, not to punish, not to control, but to make sure Santa gets home safely. And maybe, just for one night, that's exactly the watcher we want. So what are we looking at here? A heartwarming Christmas miracle born from a typo in a child's innocent phone call? Or the most effective, benevolent psychological operation the United States has ever initiated? A radar system built to detect nuclear annihilation, now narrating the flight path of a mythical sleigh. A command center carved into the granite of Cheyenne Mountain, designed to survive world-ending scenarios, now serving as the nerve center for global holiday cheer. The same infrastructure built for terror, repackaged for tenderness. And every year, without fail, people line up to be a part of it. More than 1,000 volunteers show up annually at the Cheyenne Mountain Complex and NORAD headquarters to answer calls from children across the world. Military personnel, civilian employees, spouses, veterans, teen volunteers, families. They give their time, not because they have to, but because they want to be a part of the magic. They sit where missile alerts once echoed. They answer phones meant for emergencies. They confirm Santa's position to children who still believe in something pure. That alone tells us this story was never built on fear. It was built on choice. Because if this were truly a dark operation, people wouldn't show up with smiles. They wouldn't bring their kids. They wouldn't laugh and cry when a 5-year-old whispers, "Thank you for keeping Santa safe." So maybe the truth lies somewhere in between. Maybe Operation Santa Tracker is both a PR masterpiece and a genuine act of wonder. A narrative that softened the image of military power, and a tradition that gave families something real to hold on to. A whisper of psychological design, and a chorus of human connection. And perhaps the lesson isn't that we were manipulated. Perhaps it's that humans have an extraordinary ability to transform terrifying systems into something meaningful when given the opportunity. Because what this story ultimately reveals isn't the cleverness of government strategy. It reveals us, our need for reassurance, our craving for rituals that make the world feel safer, our instinct to turn surveillance into guardianship and power into comfort. It proves that even in the shadow of war, people will still choose joy. That even in a world built on vigilance, we still protect wonder. That even in the coldest infrastructure can carry warmth if the intention behind it is genuine. So is this just a cute holiday tradition born from a misdialed phone call? Or is it America's most successful PsyOp ever initiated? Maybe it doesn't matter. Because every year, for one quiet night, millions of people across the world agree on a single belief. That someone is watching the sky, that magic is real, that kindness outweighs fear, and that hope still has coordinates. And if the most powerful military defense system on Earth can spend one night dedicated entirely to protecting joy, then maybe the real story isn't about control at all. Maybe it's about what happens when power chooses compassion, and what happens when humanity, even briefly, remembers how to believe. Thank you so much for watching. And from all of us here at Uncovered Investigates, have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.